Okay, here we go.
Mhm.
Welcome to What the F is Going On in Latin America and the Caribbean, a popular resistance broadcast of hot news out of the region, in partnership with Black Alliance for Peace Haiti Americas team, Code Pink, Common Frontiers, Council on Hemispheric Affairs, Friends of Latin America, Interreligious Task Force on Central America, Massachusetts Peace Action, and Task Force on the Americas. We broadcast Thursdays at 4:30 p.m. Pacific, 7:30 p.m. Eastern, right here on YouTube Live, including channels for The Convo Couch, Popular Resistance, and Code Pink. Post-broadcast recordings can be found at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Telegram, radindiemedia.com, and now under podcasts at popularresistance.org. Today's episode, bearing 200 years of the Monroe Doctrine. And I'm really pleased for all of you to meet our guest today, activist, friend, and Venezuelan Vice Minister of Foreign Relations for North America, Carlos Ron. He's joining us live from Chile this evening. And we're going to have him talk to us about the Monroe Doctrine, specifically focusing on South America and what Simón Bolívar experienced in his life, and how this whole U.S. foreign policy has extended through today. And so let me give you all just a brief background as to what the context of the Monroe Doctrine is. I'm sure most of you know, but let me just do this for educational purposes. The Monroe Doctrine, first articulated by U.S. President James Monroe on December 2nd, 1823, making this year 200 years, is a United States foreign policy position that opposes European colonialism in the Western Hemisphere. It holds that any intervention in the political affairs of the Americas by foreign powers is a potentially hostile act against the United States. The doctrine was central to American foreign policy for much of the 19th and early 20th centuries. The doctrine remains in place today as a pillar of U.S. foreign policy towards Latin America and the Caribbean, and no longer exclusively applies to European powers. So welcome, Carlos. Really wonderful to have your time today.
I'm very glad to be here.
So maybe for the audience, we should start with 1823 and what that meant for South America and the Caribbean.
Well, I'll even start even a bit earlier than that. But I think we have to think about the foundations of the United States of America, and the ideologies that came forth with the success of 13 colonies that managed to break away from the British Crown and form, a new republic. In a sense, the process of independence was different from North and South America, something we don't really, usually talk about. But it's different in the sense that, they were sort of inverted in order. You really had a break, when the Pilgrims came to North America, and then all the other colonies started to be, settled. They were really already breaking off from their relationship to the crown and starting a new society. So when they arrived in Plymouth Rock in 1620, you basically had an independent group of people that really had, little ties to the crown, except for the fact that they were nominally, subject to the crown, but they were pretty much on their own. They were almost expelled from Britain because of religious purposes, and they started to settle, their own way of organizing and their own, that self-ruling system, which later then, started to, on a process of growth and exploration, conquest, really, when they started, going against the native populations. And when the crown, centuries later realized, hey, these people can tribute to us, then they try to, say, hey, you should have a relationship with us. We should be able to tell you what to do. And basically, they broke off and said, no way, we're already doing our own thing. So, and that's where, the Declaration of Independence comes about. But the process really had already taken place.
Yeah.
It already started as an independent, sort of organization. In the Spanish colonies, it was different. In the Spanish colonies, Spain came in, the crown came in, the crown conquered, the crown settled, the crown began the process. And then it was then that, the people already, felt that they needed to, organize, break away. It was a backward sort of process. But what that gave the US was an advantage over, being able to already develop, its own political organization, being able to already develop, its means of production, independent from the crown. We didn't have that. It was actually in the South. It was basically just centuries of exploitation, just going in, grabbing the gold, grabbing the silver, grabbing the pearls, grabbing everything that was here, taking it back to Europe, not really for Spain, by the way. Spain became impoverished because of this process, because the different kings and queens that ruled Spain at different points in time, they really didn't invest that fortune in Spain, but rather placed it in the European banks. So actually, the countries the countries that actually become stronger because of this exploitation is the countries that have the banks like Great Britain, basically, not Spain. It gets to a point where Spain actually, becomes so indebted and didn't, because Spain is basically putting all the muscle in paying for the soldiers to be there, but not really investing back that money. So that's when the crown starts facing some problems. And that is when it becomes it goes, it's so crazy that they start selling titles of nobility. They were doing anything they could in order to revive their economy. That decay is something that would eventually in the earlier parts of the 19th century is what's going to help the independence movements in South America. You have a demoralized army, you have a poor country, and it just gave way for independence movements in South America and Central America to move forward. Now, this is important because, see, at these times, there's these thought currents going through the United States saying, look, we developed, we became a republic, we are ahead of this region. And you combine these ideas of exceptionalism that the U.S. still holds, where you combine manifest destiny, or where there's a train of thought where you say, well, the United States, since it was able to develop earlier and to develop stronger, it is our destiny to show the way to the rest of the countries. We must lead. We are the natural leaders. Everybody has to follow us, kind of thing. Or you have another set of ideas where you have principles such as the white man's burden and this idea that we have to do this because poor, underdeveloped countries, they weren't able to do so. We should help them out. Sort of idea. In both cases, what you have is, again, U.S. exceptionalism and a complete disregard for Latin Americans' capability of doing things for themselves. I say this because back in 1786, just 10 years after the independence, there's a famous letter that Thomas Jefferson writes when he's somehow asks, why doesn't the U.S. do anything else, anything more to help the Spanish colonies free themselves and become independent republics? And the reply that Jefferson gives in 1786 is, our confederacy, I'm quoting, our confederacy must be viewed as the nest from which all America, North and South, is to be peopled. We should take care to not think it for the interest of that great continent to press too soon on the Spaniards. Those countries cannot be in better hands, meaning us colonies in the hands of the Spanish crown.
Right.
My fear, says Jefferson, is that they are too feeble, the Spanish, they're too feeble to hold them till our population can be sufficiently advanced to gain it from them piece by piece. Now, this is the founding father, one of the guy who writes, the Declaration of Independence,
Right.
He's telling you right off, we don't see anything wrong with Spain holding these republics. We're just waiting till we're strong enough to take it from them.
Right.
So from the beginning, the perspective from the North is this belongs to us. We developed earlier, so we have the right, or we have the duty, whatever you want to see it as, to control this hemisphere. This is later reproduced by all these founding fathers throughout the rest the rest of the Latin American War of Independence. And then you see this doctrine, or the speech that Monroe gives. Again, these are all people that lived around the same time.
They're all the same clan.
Right. And this is the moment when Monroe says, by the way, there was a lot of exchanges between Monroe and Jefferson on issues regarding, the region. And for example, one of the things Jefferson said to Monroe was, I think the most important thing here is Cuba. We've always seen Cuba, I've always thought, says Jefferson, that, the most interesting thing we can do with Cuba is annex it. This is already seen, from this time. So what I'm getting at is,
this is nothing new.
This is not only nothing new.
Nothing new.
This is a projected plan from the founding of the United States, and it's not going to change unless you have one or two things. Either Latin Americans renounce completely to their independence and their expectations of being a sovereign continent, or the United States adopt something different from an imperialist perspective on the region. And that's why those things haven't happened. Neither of those two things have happened in the 200 years of history that we have with the Monroe Doctrine, and I don't think it that will happen soon. In any case, I'm more hopeful that things in the United States which someday change because people in the United States take control and sort of change the attitude of the government, than Latin Americans basically just renouncing to any possibility of having a future or a destiny. Now, this is as early as I said, as 1786. Meanwhile, this is the same year that Francisco de Miranda, who's the precursor of Latin American independence, who's a very important figure because he was a wonderful military strategist. He fought in the U.S. In the American Revolution. He fought in the French Revolution, and he basically leads or begins the movement of independence in South America. The flags that you see, yellow, blue, red, in Venezuela, Colombia, and Ecuador today, were his design. The name Colombia is his making. So he in the same year that Jefferson is writing the letter that I read to you, he is out in as far as Greece and Turkey, trying to find help, trying to find support for an expedition to free the Latin American or the South American and Caribbean colonies. Monroe, in the early 1800s, Monroe, while Miranda took 40 years of his life to do this, to try to get support for Latin American independence. Monroe is ambassador in Great Britain, and he writes he knows of Miranda going about, and he writes to the British Count, be careful, this man is crazy, this man is dangerous, don't help this man. So see, the idea that the Monroe Doctrine was somehow established in 1823 in order to safeguard the independence of the South American republics is not true. What they were trying to safeguard was the possibility that the United States would not have any competition in the region. And this competition was not only, of the classic European colonial powers that we know, Germany, Holland at that time, France, Britain, but also, you have the case of Russia. Russia, as we all remember, used to own Alaska. And Russia was also at the same time in 1823, it's funny that these things, sort of repeat themselves in history. But Russia at the same time was coming down from the West, thinking, or there was some, at least some possibility that Russia might expand out to what today is, the west of Canada and of California and so forth, and Washington, Oregon, and California. So it was also a message to the Russians as stay there, don't go don't go any further. That we have control over this region.
Can I just interrupt for a moment, just for the audience, because I think it's just really important you mentioned Russia because for those of us who grew up in the Western United States, specifically California, but the Northwest in general, and also the Southwest, that in 1823 was all part of Mexico and Spain. And Russia had expanded its fur trade all the way down to Fort Ross, which is the Sonoma, it's on what is today the Sonoma coast of California. And so you had both Spain and Russia to the west. The United States wanted the country to be Atlantic to Pacific. And so you had all of that going on in the western part of the Americas as well. It's fascinating.
Yeah,
when you start dissecting it the way you are, it's really fascinating to see all the
there was a lot of things. There was a lot of movement at the time.
Yeah,
that we don't think we don't think it happened. But again, it's part of the way we learn history. We kind of think that these places were blanks on a map, and then they started getting covered
just
in,
like colonizing.
Yes. And then people
But
came
the
in.
geopolitics at the time was
But the
really
geopolitics were there as well, and you had and what you don't have now is that at that time the United States didn't have control of the whole sea to shining sea kind of thing. You had the they only had there was contention there. So and the reason there are things as fantastic as Florida is first freed by Bolivar's army.
Yes.
There was an expedition that went north to Florida. They took over Amelia Island, and then there was there's a contention there with the United States and Spain and try to reconquer the area and so forth. But these times were times where things were more evened out. But as war basically depleted, the South of resource, human. I mean, Venezuela lost half of its population. I mean, think about that. Half of the country's population fighting a war of independence. Wow. So, you had of course, and then all your resources taken away, you're in the middle of a war. Reconstructing after that is very difficult, which was not, like I said, the pattern of development that the United States had.
Right.
The United States had an advantage over the rest of the region, and that's why it was able to grow faster. So then, because it knew that this was going on, it had to gain control over these resources. See, when you look at the history of the Monroe Doctrine, you have several corollaries, which are small adaptations that are made out so that you can have at different moments expand or explain or deepen the meaning of the doctrine. But here you begin to see how the United States vision just starts growing. The first corollary, that we can mention is the Hayes corollary in 1880, and basically this was an attempt to block any attempt from other European countries to build an interoceanic canal. There was a project, there was an idea that you could build a canal through Nicaragua, and so the U.S. was, and then they would lose control. Imagine if you had the canal, you had control of both oceans.
Right.
That's why they tried, they moved forward towards obtaining the goodwill of the Colombian Congress so that they could build the canal through Panama. Panama at the time was part of Colombia.
Yes.
Now what happens? There comes a point where the Colombian Congress says, wait a minute, you can't have control of this. This is something, if anything, Colombia is going to go through Colombia. So there's tensions between, the agreement or the possibility of there being an agreement with the U.S. about building this canal. And basically what the U.S. starts doing is promoting an independence movement in Panama, saying, look, these people are being oppressed. We need to help them. They need their freedom. They need their, democracy, all the ideas that we know about.
Well, it's like the playbook has just never changed.
No, it's
like the 200-year-old playbook, and they haven't changed one part of it.
That's right. And that's how Panama, this is a process that Panama, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying there aren't, regional interests and nationalist feelings from the Panamanian people. That's a whole different issue.
Yeah.
But the fact that the republic broke away was
a separatist movement.
Had a lot to do with the presence of the U.S. in the building of the canal.
Yeah. Yeah.
You had an attempt in the 1880s to unite the region with under a pro-U.S. or a U.S. directed customs union. This is what they were doing because so that would benefit the U.S. In 1895, I'll tell you something else. The only corollary, they then start saying, well, the Monroe Doctrine allows us to intervene in any place that we believe might generate a conflict or might generate a possibility of another empire coming in or another international power coming in. It's 1885 is an interesting date for Venezuela because this is where this contention with Great Britain that we're still carrying today with Guyana over this territory that Venezuela still claims. Well, this is the moment where the United States comes in, sides with Venezuela or with the Venezuelan claim.
Are we talking about the Essequibo here, the territory between Venezuela and Guyana? Okay.
Yes, this is the moment where the U.S. intervenes in order to kick out. Basically, what they wanted to do was, restrain the British presence, but it was sloppy, and not only was sloppy, it was controlled. It was a process that was controlled by the U.S. by U.S. interests and not by Venezuelan interests because we're in the middle of civil wars. So part of the reason, and this is a whole different subject, but I'll just say this: part of the reason we are in this contention today with Guyana is because the treaty that ends up being signed in 1899 with a lot of the U.S. intervention in the treaty was completely irregular. It wasn't done with Venezuela's. It wasn't done for Venezuela. It was done in the name of Venezuela, so that U.S. could, have its interests play out in the region, and that's why we up to today still contest that treaty.
Yeah, that treaty also that particular piece of land is oil rich, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So.
That actually it's seaboard more than anything, but
yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So bring him, closer to today. In Roosevelt's corollary, 1902. Again, it's when they say the U.S. has the right to intervene in Latin American affairs whenever a country is not able to defend or to keep up its financial compromises. Again, it's a time where Venezuela is being blocked by foreign companies trying to make us pay some debts and so forth. And the United States basically intervenes, saying, we have the right to come in and organize whenever a Latin American country is not able to organize its own finances or its own affairs. Again, what we see is how this document or this doctrine became really a tool that you stretch it, every year, with something different, and you justify American or U.S., I should say, intervention into any of the internal affairs of our countries. I'll give you one last corollary, just so you see the extent of this. In 1912, the Lodge Corollary basically says that U.S. has the right to intervene even when there's the possibility of foreign interventions by private interests, foreign private interests. There was a moment that Mexico was thinking about selling part of the Magdalena Bay, which is in Mexico's west coast. It was thinking about privatizing basically it's part of the bay to some Japanese private interests. And here also U.S. intervenes and breaks the deal and doesn't allow this deal to move forward because again it was refusing the presence of foreign interests, but not only foreign as a country or as a state, but also as private interests from other countries. Mm-hmm. So again, it's just look how years go on, and look how you're able to play with this doctrine and sort of shape of all types of interventions throughout the 20th century. This just grew even further. The United States wanted to have more control over the Caribbean. So you had a series of interventions from Puerto Rico, from Cuba, Dominican Republic, Haiti, Nicaragua. In Nicaragua, you see, Nicaragua was basically private U.S. citizens going there and taking over, land, and then the U.S. coming in as a country backing up these. It's as if today, I don't know, something like Blackwater type of,
William Walker's folks.
So we'll somehow come in and take over land, and then you have the whole country coming in and backing that up and supporting that.
Yeah.
It was the whole doctrine throughout the end of the 19th century, the 20th century, and even some of the 21st century has been, a tool for occupating territories, Puerto Rico, Nicaragua, Haiti, Panama, appropriating, customs like they did in the Dominican Republic, taking control of the oil production like they did in Mexico, like they did in Venezuela, taking control of the mines like they did in Peru, in Bolivia, in Chile, taking control of, even the meat production like they did in Argentina, of finances like they did in Brazil, is a way, to justify all these sorts of intervention against our region, and against the sovereignty and the will of the Latin American people.
That's what I have to, it's just, I'll say this again, it's just the same. You've mentioned the Nicaragua Canal. Okay, that's still in play today. That's an incredibly hot subject now. And it's, in my opinion, and I'm sure yours as well, it's part of the whole anti-Ortega government narrative coming out of the state and out of the United States. The foreign investment by Japan in Mexico just it's, so today it's Russia, China, Iran, India, all these other foreign investments in the hemisphere that the United States is trying to push out. I think it's probably too late for that. But it's just, It's the same.
Now the modalities vary because you see during the 20th century, and this is probably the most painful of all of these histories. I mean, just between 62 and 68, you had at least 14 coups d'etats in the region, where you either had the CIA acting, or you had outright marine invasions like in the Dominican Republic in 65. So
for humanitarian purposes, that was the
yes,
first
well,
invasion.
of course, to promote freedom and democracy and these things. So
NPR, yeah.
So really, what we see, is a very violent type of intervention, which I think sometime after the Vietnam War, and after Chile, I would have to say, and after the coup of 73 in Chile, it really becomes more difficult to. It's not that it didn't happen. There were other instances where it happened afterwards, but it became less acceptable in U.S. public opinion to have these outright, violent outbursts. I mean, you had, there's maybe because you started seeing images of these repressions and the torture and
which we don't see so much today.
So strategies has to already start changing. Chile was a moment, this year is the 50th anniversary of the coup against Salvador Allende, who was a democratically elected, leader who happened to be from the left. But what he was trying to do was, a program that basically, increased access to housing, democratized healthcare, education, land reform, all these things that have been the historic needs of Latin America. This is not extraordinarily revolutionary. It was revolutionary in the sense that, you didn't have this before. Now you had somebody with the guts to do it. But it wasn't privatizing. It wasn't a revolution in the sense that you were the state was going to expropriate everything and take over all the means of production. It wasn't that. It was a social transformation. They wouldn't have it, and the attack against Chile and against Allende was something that was where you combined both the military aspect and the violent aspect with other tools from the toolbox, the economic sanctions, make the economy scream.
Yeah.
Well, we've seen the type of interventions that we've seen since, the more time goes by, have taken that shape. See, today, where we see the blockade against Venezuela, the sanctions against Nicaragua, the sanctions against Cuba, these are all parts of this other type of tools that the U.S., under the same principles of the Monroe Doctrine, is using. Is cutting out your finance possibilities. Is cutting out the possibility of you selling your products. It's a media attack in all fronts of from social media to journal or
broadcast and print,
broadcast, every type of information is diplomatic. I mean, you've seen the thing they try to do with Venezuela, recognize somebody as a different president in order to block diplomatically the country. So there's the embassy different modalities, even and look out, because there's I would say two very interesting modalities that we don't often look at, but there's intervention in the religious sphere.
Yes,
missionaries and some that don't really have a religious agenda. They have a subversion agenda of another type. And there's interventions in the NGO sphere. With this idea, we're doing humanitarian work and we're trying to help people out. And basically, they're channeling money into subversion of democratically elected governments that are not lined up with the State Department's idea of what this region should be. So when we think about today, today's Monroe Doctrine, first of all, we have to remember the vision is the same.
That hasn't clearly, and I mean it's
and
from day one.
day one is the same.
Yeah.
We are seen as part of the U.S. Belong to the U.S. The other thing that you have to see is that the 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 way you implement the doctrine changes. You
Mm.
may even have, during the Obama administration, you had Kerry come out and say, the Monroe Doctrine is over. This is it. There's no, this conciliatory type of discourse that then every so often comes out, only to have Bolton reverse that when the Trump administration say, no, we're promoting the Monroe 2.0.
The Monroe Doctrine is alive and well.
And
He
it's a
said that
2.0.
from Miami.
We're in
He
a
said that.
new high tech, type of promotion. So that's what you really, that's what we really have nowadays. Now, Terry, one thing that I wanted to just show and to comment, and that we say that there are two currents in this region. We say that there is this, idea of Monroe, and we from Venezuela, but from all other countries as well, we contrasted them with the ideas of Simon Bolivar, which we think are important, and the Bolivarianism that gave the name to the Bolivarian Revolution, to this project that Hugo Chavez has moved forward, but other people also recognize themselves in the same project, because the project that what Bolivar fought for, what his idea was that this would be an independent region, a sovereign region. He fought for something that he called the equilibrium of the universe. This idea that you have forces that have to balance each other out, that no one force should be able to overexpand or impose itself over others, but that you have different poles or different regions sort of balancing their interests in order to have, which is the only way, as Bolivar described it, that you can achieve sustainable peace. Sustainable peace is not just peace that you declare because you're defeated. Sustainable peace is a peace that guarantees justice, development, and guarantees, over time that, that peace remains in place. Now, in 1826, 3 years after the Monroe Doctrine was issued, Bolivar issued a call for Congress, the Panama Congress, where these new republics would come in and would meet. And I just want to say, and I just want to mention really quickly, just a couple of the things that were on the agenda, so that you get an idea of what the difference is between Bolivarianism and this Monroeism. First, there was a call for to denounce Spain's imperialist attitude and to denounce the damage it had caused in the Americas. By the way, the United States sent representatives to this Congress, not because Bolivar invited them, but Bolivar respected the decision of the Colombian Congress at the time, who did invite them.
And the Colombian Congress at the time was what today is Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador.
Yes,
Peru,
it was united.
Bolivia,
It was united
yeah.
at one republic. Yes.
Yeah.
So Bolivar at the time was president of Peru, because the process of independence kept going,
Yes.
moving southward. So he became president of Peru, and then the government of Colombia took another decision. And this is important because it's often claimed that Bolivar was some sort of outlandish dictator that ruled, and you can see that despite the fact that he had founded Colombia, he allowed Colombia to take its own decision in the sense. Colombia does invite the United States, and Henry Clay, who is the Secretary of State at the time, gives the instructions to the U.S. representatives to go, and he says there should be no denouncing of Spain as this crime committer, and you should also not. One of the other, another point that Bolivar was making in the Congress was calling for the independence of Cuba, Puerto Rico, also the Canary Islands, and also the Philippines. It was this movement of freedom, of self-determination, and the United States opposed they had specific instructions to oppose this movement. One of the problems, and this is interesting, but one of the problems that justified this decision by the United States was that they feared that any of these countries that would become independent could fall into the danger of a slave revolution like in Haiti.
Yeah.
And people from the South didn't want this.
Yeah.
So
People from the southern United States.
from the southern United States, yes. From the southern United States didn't want this because they were still slaveholders.
Yeah.
So part of the and why do I say this? Because I have been told, we've been told for 200 years that the purpose of these doctrines and the purpose of these, this U.S. intervention in our region is because the ideas of freedom, democracy, and equality, and this bullshit.
It's economics.
It's no, but it's also not true.
Right.
See, because you
No,
weren't
it's not
willing
true.
to denounce the imperialism that, in the region and the crimes that were committed by Spain. You weren't willing to free the countries that were still under the subjection of these empires. You weren't willing to free the slaves.
Yeah.
So you can't really talk about
That's
freedom.
Right.
Because the enslaved people, and there was another point in Bolivar's agenda for the Congress, was the total abolition of slavery in the Confederated States of in the new republics. So when you see what the two projects are, there's only one project that defends human rights. There's only one project that defends self-determination. There's only one project that defends freedom and your right to choose your own form of government. And it's not Monroe's project.
No.
It was
Not at
Bolivar's.
all. It was Bolivar's.
So-
with the Panama Congress and the U.S. giving, the instruction not to denounce Spain, and with Bolivar wanting to continue the liberation of the Spanish colonies, including the Philippines and the Canary Islands. I mean, that goes right back to what you were saying, that the United States was just waiting for Spain to become so weak they could take the colonies for themselves, which eventually they took the Philippines. I mean, it's very, oh, there you are. Okay, you're back.
Sorry, I lost you for a second.
Yeah, I was saying what regarding the Panama Congress and the U.S. instructions not to denounce Spain, and Bolivar wanting to denounce Spain and continue freeing the remaining Spanish colonies, including the Canary Islands and the Philippines. And that goes right back to what you said earlier, where the U.S. was just waiting for Spain to be so weak it could just finish taking the last of the empire.
Right.
Yeah.
Because that's actually what happened. When in the Spanish American War, that's precisely what goes on. You have the United States getting control of Puerto Rico, of Cuba, and also the Philippines. So then you had that allowed the U.S. to have a complete map of resources from the Caribbean, but also from the Pacific.
Exactly. Yeah.
Again,
global hedge money.
In the interest of the growth of the United States as a country, as an empire.
Yeah. I know you don't have much time left, and I wonder if there's just one thing I can have us talk about quickly. This being the 200th 200th anniversary of the Monroe Doctrine, 2023. One of the things that, and you know this because I've seen you throughout the hemisphere, it's beginning in October, I would start, it started way before then, but let's October 2020 in Bolivia with the presidential elections there and the return of the MAS to power, and then going on to the Venezuelan National Assembly elections in December of 2020, and then all through 2021, we had elections in Nicaragua, in Ecuador, in Venezuela again, in Honduras, and through 2022 in Chile, in Colombia, in Brazil. And I was, as were you, we were international election observers in many, if not all of those elections. To me, what I see today, having looked back at 18 months of elections, the people south of the United States, Latin America, and the Caribbean voted principally for national sovereignty, natural resource sovereignty, which your former foreign minister was so clear, Jorge Ariaza was always so clear at stressing natural resource sovereignty along with national sovereignty. And so people voted for those two things. And I believe they also voted for governments that were proposing an economic system beneficial to the majority of the citizens. And that could be anything from, social democratic to revolutionary left.
Sure.
It's a spectrum of economic solutions. It's not any one. But to me, that has really consolidated, I don't want to say liberation, because that's been, the people south of the United States have been fighting for that for 500 years. But it, to me, is almost as if the Monroe Doctrine is being ended in the South, in Latin America and the Caribbean. The people are ending it on their own. Anything the United States does at this point is going to be reactionary, not proactive. It's going to be a reactionary thing, because the movement to absolve the Monroe Doctrine from the hemisphere is coming from the South. And I think all these electoral results really, they don't just emphasize the change in government, they emphasize what's happening on the ground with the people.
Yeah.
And how they voted, because these are constitutional changes through the electoral process. They're not hot revolutions. These are what the people have expressed at the polls that they want, en masse across the hemisphere. I wish we could do it in the States.
Well, the problem is that that's actually when the Monroe Doctrine gets triggered. See, whenever it's not the first time that we've expressed our will to do one thing or the other. Again, if you going back to the example of Chile in '73, in 1970, people elected Salvador Allende to do precisely those things. To nationalize copper, to move forward in social programs. And then the Monroe Doctrine acted itself in one of the most vicious, ways, and overthrew him and set up a regional, program called the Operation Condor to basically destroy any other type of, attempts as such in the region. So what I think what we have to be careful about is that, whenever the, Latin American, the Caribbean reasserts itself, is whenever, the doctrine goes out and becomes more violent and more aggressive. So we have to be careful and see how, how that's going to express itself in the next, couple of years, or because, like you said, the region is now taking another turn towards the left. Yeah. I mean, we saw what happened at the beginning of the 20th century or 21st century. I mean, when you have this first wave, when the people called it, the pink tide and everything, but Chavez, Lula, Evo, Correa, you have this movement going, towards a more, like you said, cutting off, from U.S. dependency, and the reaction was, we hit Honduras and overthrow the government of Honduras and overthrow the government in Paraguay, and then try to just suffocate Venezuela with sanctions. And so and it's been a vicious second decade and third decade of the 21st century trying to fight that off. So we have to be careful, I think, in the sense that it's going to generate a reaction. That's why I think at the end of the day it is very important, whatever you do in the United States and whatever people, do in the United States, to change that policy, because the change, we're going to have the same, perspective. We're going to fight it out, and we'll lose some battles and we'll win others, but we want our self-determination. What has to change is the way the U.S. and the people in the U.S. see themselves within the framework of this doctrine. That's why the U.S. has to say, this is not who we are. These are not our values. These are not what we stand for. This is not the type of relationship we want. In a world that we're, where we're threatened by, a nuclear holocaust, we're threatened by, famine, where we're threatened by, climate change that who knows how it's going to affect us. We have to look towards cooperation. We have to look towards solidarity. We have to look toward other types of values, not towards this crazy attempt of dominating Latin American and Caribbean resources in order to benefit, just a small group in the United States. It is up to, I think that's where the responsibility comes in place for the movements and the people of the United States to, struggle to change that policy and change that relationship. And you'll be surprised, when you study Latin American history, you realize that a lot of movements, especially during the Cold War, which wasn't cold in Latin America, it's a hot war in Latin America.
Right. Yeah.
But during that period called the Cold War, there were a lot of countries there were a lot of movements that were not, anti-American. They were not, they were not even communist. It's very difficult to say, for example, that Jacobo Arbenz in 1954 was a communist leader in Guatemala, but he was trying to do a land reform, and the United States blocked it. Every time that you see, an attempt at justice for Latin America, the United States comes in and has sort of pushed that possibility out. So there has to be a point where the United States, the people of the United States say, this isn't what we stand for. This is not what we want. This is not where we want our resources to be spent. We want a different type of relationship with, one of cooperation. And you'll be surprised how much of a positive reaction you will receive from this continent.
Well, I just want to, just for the audience, the pushback from the United States, the aggressiveness when you mentioned, Arbenz in Guatemala wanting land reform, and now today, you see, like in the past month, the progressive narrative that and it's getting exceedingly more progressive from Mexico, from the president of Mexico, and this really strong anti-AMLO narrative coming out of the States now. Of course, Mexico's getting ready to go into presidential elections. So the timing is not, because AMLO's pretty much saying the same things he's said since he was mayor of Mexico City. Right. But going into the elections in 2024, you've getting this really, really strong anti-AMLO narrative out of the States. So, it's always something. There's always that pushback from the States to maintain control and maintain its model and its hegemony of the hemisphere and most of the global South. I would the intervention in Africa is extraordinarily aggressive as well. But I am happy you still have faith in the American people to make change. Because I think we do too. And I just want to tell the audience there's a really great forum that's going to be taking place the 28th and 29th in Washington, D.C., 28th and 29th of April. It's a Latin American policy forum, and it's called Burying 200 Years of Monroe Doctrine. And it's about, it'll be 4 panels in discussion of, the panels are theme-based, not country-based. One panel is on sanctions, so there'll be a very in-depth conversation on Venezuela attached to that panel. But it will talk about U.S. policy towards the region and also offer from Latin America and the Caribbean alternatives, what the people have created for themselves outside of the United States. And so it's an extraordinarily important time for that forum and a good opportunity. If you can go to DC and physically attend, terrific. Otherwise, it will be live stream. You can participate that way as well. You can register for the live or virtual event at americaspolicyforum.org, and I will put that in the chat. It's also in the program notes on the YouTube channel. So just give a plug for that, because it's a great time for people in the United States and outside the United States to exchange ideas and what's possible, what needs to happen to create a peaceful hemisphere, a peaceful world, I would say so. So Carlos, I know I kept you way over your allotted time. I apologize, sort of.
Oh, this is
I'm always so happy to have your time, and you're so insightful, and everything you shared with us for this episode is just really so important for us all to hear and learn from, and I'm really grateful for that.
well. Thank you for the opportunity, and this is very. I like talking about this because it's a way of seeing the whole picture.
Yeah.
You often don't get a chance to see it, put everything in that framework, and I think it's really important so that we can really understand the story of the relationship between our regions. But yes, always happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy you had time for the episode. So and I love the Monroe versus Bolivar. I mean, that just is perfect in and very for people to understand, and the difference between the two is really paramount for the region. So thank you again, and I just want to thank the audience. We had a really nice live turnout for you this evening. So for the audience, you've been watching What the F is Going On in Latin America and the Caribbean. We're a popular resistance broadcast. You can find us every Thursday, 7:30 p.m. Eastern on YouTube Live, on the Convo Couch, Code Pink, and Popular Resistance YouTube channels. Post-broadcast recordings can be found on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. So thank you again, Carlos. And for the audience, we'll see you next Thursday.
Take care.